Hello, this is Angie Yingst, and you're listening to Centered, grounded conversations about the metaphysical. Hello, friends. It's Angie Yingst, or Angie, if you will. You're welcome to call me Angie. Welcome to Centered. Today, we're doing something a little different, which feels very on brand for late 2025, but everything feels like it's in a season of shifting, shedding, rebecoming, and so why not do a podcast that's a little different? These essays that I'm going to read are really deeply personal. I'm reading 3 essays that kind of shaped me, stretched me, carried me through some of the difficult seasons of my life, or are reflecting on difficult seasons of my life. These pieces were written years ago after the stillbirth of my daughter Lucia passed almost 17 years ago. It will be 17 years, December 21st and 22nd. And that loss broke me open in ways I didn't yet have language for. And then more was written, over the years, and some of it tied back to the grief. But if you want to know who I am as a healer, as a tarot reader, as a spiritual teacher, or a circle keeper, grief is really my sacred opening. And so that's why I really am so intolerant of spiritual bypassing, because anybody who's grieving has been through that. Everything is in God's plan is such a thing that doesn't help to hear at the time. And I kind of trace like the path of early grief to gratitude as we kind of get into gratitude season with Thanksgiving coming up in the US. But even all the holidays of December with Christmas, this is like in AA, we call this the Bermuda Triangle, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. It's a hard time for a lot of people, and that's because grief is very present for us. So these pieces can be a little raw. They're very real. They kind of remind me how healing isn't a straight line. And in that way, I thought it might be helpful to kind of share them with you, to show the spiral looping back on the same truths that we revisit, year after year, time after time, and we go deeper and deeper each time we reflect. So as we move into another season where you're going to read tons of essays about gratitude and reflection and blah, 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 I wanted to kind of revisit the messy, beautiful intersections of being human. So one of these essays is from 2016, one is from 2013. These 2 essays came from a very raw, real place. The other is before I worked as a healer and was just a grieving mom writing into the ether, connecting with other grieving parents on my quote-unquote mommy blog. God, I mean, honestly, is there a worse phrase than mommy blog? But at any rate, in the liner notes, I'll kind of explain the essays a little bit and try to put timestamps on them. So if you are not interested in one, or you already read it in a newsletter or something, because I did write these and publish them before, so you may have read it before or heard it before. I find that rereading and revisiting, like, we may have an original reaction to some of these essays, and then as we reread them, a decade later, we're struck by different things, or we realize how we're there now where we weren't before. So, as I reread them, a decade later or whatever, I'm struck about how little has changed about the truth they hold for me. My language has definitely changed. My self-understanding has changed, for example. But, like, I've come to understand my neurodivergence, which I can hear in there. The restlessness and my sensitivity differences, which used to seem like a problem, they're now, I kind of understand where they're from. But, I've healed, I've softened, I've grown. I am now almost 15 years into recovery. So these pieces speak to me in a different, clear, steady voice. And, they're kind of in the ways that grief and gratitude braid together and are kind of holy for us. So today I'm reading them out loud. So I polished them a little bit for audio, but I tried to keep the heart intact. And I updated things like the dates. Like, instead of saying my son is 2, I say he's 11, which he is. So this grief episode is really about gratitude, spiritual bypassing, and the holiness of letting yourself scream. So I included the last essay, the one that comes from before I was a healer is about Tonglen meditation, which is a beautiful Buddhist meditation that might help you if you're in the weeds of grief from anything, not just grief from death and loss, but grief from a divorce, grief from, loss of a job, grief from, all kinds of grief, especially like family of origin grief, any of that kind of stuff. So I actually am going to be doing 2 little guided meditations. One is a guided Tonglen meditation, and one is just a guided meditation on my website, which is themoonandstone.com. They're going to be on the blog with this podcast. And the reason is just because it's too long to keep doing all of these different things. So they're really for you to use if you want them. In short, if you're struggling, sometimes hearing someone's voice guide us can be just that thing that breaks the silence and helps us, move to the next place. So that's why I did them. But just a gentle note before we begin. In this episode, I talk about infant loss, grief, NICU experiences, and I shouldn't say infant loss, I should say baby loss. My daughter was stillborn. I was 38 weeks pregnant, so she hadn't breathed outside of the womb. That's how they distinguish stillbirth from infant loss or baby loss or neonatal loss. So she's stillborn. But I talk about Buddhist compassion practices, which involve being present with suffering. So if you're currently grieving or feeling emotionally tender, please feel free to skip this episode or come back later or pause it. Let your nervous system kind of choose the pace. Your heart gets to choose the depth in which you are willing or able to go. You're never required to move faster than your healing allows. So enjoy these 3 pieces. "11 years ago, snow fell gently all day as I sat next to the fire, cuddling my newest little one, Zachary. And though he was meant to be an induction baby, he had other plans. My water broke early, and I labored for more than 30 hours before he arrived. He came into the world in distress, fluid in his lungs, and they whisked him to the neonatal intensive care unit, NICU. My arms ached with that primal animal longing to hold him. I'd felt that before when my daughter died. I sat outside his little plastic crib, sending Reiki into the air around him, palms hovering over his crown and feet, soul star and earth star helping him to adjust to being in a body. It felt like he hadn't fully settled in yet. My friend Jack said, "It's hard for a spiritual being to become human. May the rest of his adjustment be easier than mine." And we laughed, because there's truth in jokes like that. In the NICU, watching him struggle to breathe, my mantra became, "Scream, baby." The doctors told me the fluid was likely because he had an easy birth. I had 3 strong pushes and he was out. My 4th baby. Exactly what I had prayed for. Ease. But that ease can mean babies don't get quite angry enough to scream out the rest of the fluid in their lungs. And that struggle, the pushing, the screaming, that's the thing that clears the lungs and prepares them for life. I thought about that a lot, sitting in the big room surrounded by tiny fighters. Sometimes we need to scream and struggle against our own contentment. One of my religion professors, one of my main mentors, Dr. John Raines, used to say that babies cry because they want justice. They come in knowing they deserve warmth and love, food and care. Babies don't hate themselves. Babies don't feel unworthy of those things. Babies scream because they refuse to settle for being ignored, and they stop screaming when they are proven wrong. This time of year, the world talks endlessly about gratitude, especially in a wellness community filled with spiritual bypassers and charlatans who don't live the life they preach you should live. And yes, gratitude elevates us, expands us, heals us. But blanket statements like, "just be grateful," completely miss the point. Gratitude is not a platitude. Gratitude is a practice, one that must include grief, sadness, suffering, illness, loss, depression, the stuckness in our stories that tells us, "I am worthy of not suffering." Gratitude isn't simple. Think of the baby and mama pushing to get him out for longer than 3 pushes. Everyone is pissed off. Everyone is suffering. Babies are stuck in this tight place, ready for the world. They don't know what they're ready for, actually. They're just like, I'm getting out of this. I'm too big. And if you've birthed a child, you know that when they are in your vagina or on your cervix, it's not the time that you're distinctly thinking about how awesome it is to have a gigantic baby head stuck in your vaginal canal. You're thinking, get out. And the baby isn't contemplating how much fluid will be pushed out of his lungs. It doesn't know anything about all the physiological processes that happen. They are stuck in darkness. They're tired. They're overwhelmed. They can't see the light at the end of the literal and metaphorical tunnel. I think we do a huge disservice to tell people to be thankful when they're in that place of suffering. I believe with all my heart that our suffering is there for a purpose, and yet it's not so helpful to be reminded of that during the suffering. To tell someone to be grateful for what they have in that moment is frankly cruel. After my daughter died, I was told so often to be grateful that I had Beatrice, who was 18 months at the time, and I was so grateful. But struggling with gratitude is the practice of gratitude. The suffering, the stuckness, the feeling unworthy, these are the contractions before the scream. These are the moments that are pushing us out of stuckness. These are the moments when we remember our birthright to demand comfort, love, oxygen, warmth. All we have to do is trust that our feelings, when they arise, are right and important and valuable to the next phase of our healing, even if our contemporaries shame us when we feel negative, sad, or self-pitying. Suffering is there. It's the truth. But we get to decide whether we're going to put shame on the suffering. So suffering, the feeling less than, unworthy, stuck, this is the gateway to the scream that gets it all out. Let it be the catalyst for feeling worthy of not suffering. Can you find gratitude in your own screaming? I get so proud of myself when I can express my anger, or express my sadness, or express my rage, my pain, because I grew up so often not sharing those things. Because I didn't want to worry people, because I didn't want to upset anyone, because I wanted everything to be nice. Can you find gratitude in your own declaration of worthiness? Can your suffering be the prayer of gratitude? Instead of thinking you have to find the gratitude in it, just be like, oh, thank goodness I'm going through this. I know I'm going to get somewhere else. It's a path. So when I'm grieving or sick, I try to keep it simple. I try to stay very present and look out the window and watch a leaf fall. I breathe. I remember I'm a human, not a Buddha. Thanksgiving at its best is a communal ritual of gratitude. But I know how hard this time of year is for so many, those facing dysfunctional families, estrangement, loss, illness, depression. Even in my own brown skin, I face discomfort at the fact that I'm celebrating Thanksgiving when so many Native peoples were killed. And there's a myth going on around that. And it's a national day of mourning for Native peoples. So I live with that push and pull of wanting to enjoy my family and also being keenly aware of the suffering of so many humans in this myth-filled history that we share in the United States. So this year, maybe instead of shaming those who aren't in that full place of gratitude and joy, joy, happy, happy, let's let them scream. Let's sit with them in their stuckness. Let's marvel at the holy indignation that rises from suffering. It is our birthright to scream. It clears the lungs. Literally and metaphorically, it lets us breathe. My son's 11th birthday was on the 22nd. And he's silly and joyful, and he brings a lot of light. But he still has lung issues. And this year I find myself grateful, not just for him, but for every scream he's had that's pushed me into being a mother that can respond with compassion. Or a mother that gets upset and frustrated at it. And then I go, oh, right. He's screaming for justice. Because I know every scream I've had has pushed me into more healing. So here's my blessing, the one I offered the night that I brought him home. Scream. Scream, baby. And I'll be dancing to your siren song of healing. Gratitude. This was originally published 2013, lightly polished 2025 for audio. During this time of year, our community explodes with talk of gratitude. Its healing power, its ability to shift energy, its role in manifestation and abundance. And listen, gratitude does change the world. Or at the very least, it changes your perception of the world. But the way these phrases get tossed around, gratitude, positive thinking, manifestation, abundance, often lacks any real acknowledgement of how hard-won those concepts are for many people. The holidays can be brutal for those navigating dysfunctional families, parenting challenges, grief, widowhood, financial hardship, depression, anxiety, you name it. It can feel downright cruel to have joy and cheer of the season plastered everywhere when you yourself are suffering. And I'm part of a community that talks a lot about positive thinking, about manifestation and holding the highest vibration. And as a light worker, that's definitely part of my job, to help illuminate spiritual pathways, highlight our soul's potential, and guide seekers towards the lessons in their lives. We love rainbows and unicorns. We love golden light. We love affirmations. But if I'm being honest, and I'm always being honest with you guys, the New Age community is terrible at dealing with the hard emotions, with grief, anger, depression, anxiety. These emotions often get demonized as blocks that cause illness, hardship, and failure. Everything from acne to job loss gets pinned on negative thinking, as though people create their own suffering through bad vibes alone. Not so long ago, positive thinking used to piss me off for this exact reason, and it is the reason I didn't come into this community, and it put the blame squarely on the shoulders of the suffering. If only you could think better, if only you could visualize harder, if only you could be more grateful, then the universe would reward you. And then in 2008, my second daughter died during labor. 38 weeks into a healthy pregnancy, she was perfect. 6 pounds, 20 inches long. There was no explanation, no reason found. She was simply gone. And in that moment, something in me broke. I felt betrayed by my body, betrayed by the cult of positivity. I was a yoga, meditating, incense-burning, vegan, spiritually uplifted woman, and none of it saved her. And when I started grieving out loud and writing publicly about grief, about my spiritual crisis, about parenting after loss, my entire world rearranged itself around this central absence. And while most people were compassionate, there were those well-meaning but deeply misguided people who tried to yank me out of my own grief with platitudes. Everything happens for a reason. Your daughter wants you to be happy. You can have more babies. You should focus on your living daughter. You're dwelling too much on this. You're dwelling too much on that. And underneath it all was the insinuation that I had lost not just my daughter, but my gratitude. That I was doing grief wrong. As though grief and gratitude cannot coexist. As though love must always wear a smile and sadness cancels out appreciation. The truth is, every grieving person knows in their bones, grief and gratitude are intricately intertwined. We grieve because we are grateful. We ache because we love. We mourn because our hearts knew joy. After Lucy died, my awareness of impermanence sharpened instantly. I held my living daughter closer. I watched her breathe with awe. I thought, how did she live? And I was profoundly grateful and profoundly devastated in equal measures. People weren't trying to silence my grief because they hated hearing it. They were trying to save me from the unfixable. My suffering reminded them of the impermanence of life, that none of us have any control. That's so scary. And when people would say everything happens for a reason, I would think, what is the reason your child lived and mine died? And that usually shut them up, and sometimes, most of the time, I just said it in my head. In the spiritual world, we sometimes say that our souls choose their lessons before we incarnate, that our losses, illnesses, challenges, traumas are part of what we signed up for. And listen, that's part of my belief. I believe that deeply. But it is never helpful to say that to someone who's suffering. Because whether our suffering is self-chosen or not, we are still in pain. We still have to walk through it as humans, not as enlightened beings, not as the Buddha. The miracle, this true spiritual triumph, is that through our suffering, we eventually find acceptance, wisdom, meaning again. And you can't shortcut that. You can't bypass it. I do not think everything happens for a reason. I think we make meaning out of everything that happens. So as light workers, our role isn't to fix someone's pain. It's to simply sit beside them as an equal, to become a conduit for compassion, not correction. To open our own memory of suffering so that we can meet them eye to eye and heart to heart. Compassion is not pity. Compassion is also not positivity. Compassion is presence. Most light workers I know came to their compassion through grief, and through suffering, and through illness, through their own death and rebirth cycles. We sit with people not because we have answers, but because we've walked through darkness too. When people cry on my crystal healing table, when they laugh, they scream, snore, collapse into themselves, I don't try to shift them. I don't try to move them up and out. I invite them to go deeper. I don't offer them a tissue. I don't want them to hide their crying. Go deeper, I think. What's under the thing? What does this emotion want to tell you? Where are you feeling this in your body? Because for me, in my practice and what I've seen is emotions stem from two sources, deep love or deep fear. And both are sacred, and both are worthy of being felt. So positive affirmations, manifestations, prayer, they're tools, yes, for reshaping life, but they don't replace the need to feel the feelings. You don't start with the affirmation, you end with it. When people ask me, where does grief, what chakra does grief block? I say, it doesn't block any. The suppressing of grief makes you sick. The suppressing of emotion blocks chakras. Feeling emotion moves you towards healing. It is flow. It goes through the body. Society gives grieving people very few options. You see it in every show, right? You either collapse entirely or pretend nothing happened. You don't want to talk about it. I don't want to look in that room. I'm just going to close the door and never go back in my child's room. How many shows have you... I literally just saw a show like that. And, you know, we see these grieving parents become psychopaths or never leave the house, or they're just totally fine and everybody's like, why are they totally fine? Grief isn't linear like that. It comes in waves. You cry one moment, you laugh the next, you feel numb the minute after that. There's no role to play in grief unless someone forces it onto you. So my invitation this season is simple. Give the gift of abiding. Stay present with people. Let people feel what they feel. Don't take it personally. Let yourself feel what you feel. Don't take it personally. Don't make it a character assassination of yourself. I struggled going to baby showers. My best friend was pregnant after years of infertility treatments, and I could not go to her baby shower. Not because I didn't love her, but because I was so deeply entrenched in grief that I struggled to be around grieving people. And it was her day. And the last thing I wanted her to do was comfort me on her day. And so I took that, okay, if I'm going to be, like, maybe she'll never forgive me. But she was one of my best friends. Of course she forgave me. She understood because she sat with me in compassion. So remember, like, those feelings that we stuff down, the feelings of jealousy and rage and anger and all of those things, is part of grief. And you don't have to have grief if you had like just a child loss. We have grief for so many thousands of reasons. So don't shift people out of grief. Meet them in it. Get curious, hold their hand, hold space. Remember, bad things happen to good people all the time. We kind of make it immoral. At least it used to be that way. I think it's changing a lot, but I mean, there used to be this sort of moral thing, like you did something and that's why you're suffering. I mean, I can remember after my daughter died, I thought, what did I do to deserve this? Right? What horrible thing did I do in my past life that brought this on? But any worldview that suggests that bad things only happen to bad people and good things only happen to good people is not spirituality. It's judgment dressed up as enlightenment. And we don't do that here. We don't do shame anymore. Right? We're not doing that. That's old stuff. We all deserve love. We all deserve safety. We all deserve compassion. And how we walk through suffering, that becomes the pavement of our spiritual evolution. It asks us to listen, to soften, to stay human. And that is the work. It's always the work. Before we close today, I wanted to offer one more piece, something that found me in the earliest months after Lucia died. It's a meditation practice that held me when nothing else could. And I know meditation can be incredibly hard when we're grieving or going through hard emotions and sadness and anger and rage and jealousy and abandonment and all of those things. Sometimes silence feels like a room full of knives. And so if you're listening and you're in the thick of loss, take this gently, take it slowly, take it only if it feels supportive. This next piece is about Tonglen, which is a Buddhist compassion practice that taught me how to breathe inside my pain instead of trying to outrun it. It didn't fix my grief, it didn't erase my suffering, but it made me feel less terrified of feeling it, and it helped me connect with the larger experience of grief. I think for me, grief was my, I said my sacred opening, but it also was my sacred path of at least a glimpse of enlightenment in some ways. Because one of the things that happened after Lucia died was I realized that everybody grieves. Everybody has grief in their story. It's the thing that, dare I say, connects us all. And so sometimes that's enough for us. So, when I struggled with things I had thought I mastered after Lucia died, compassion, meditation, silence, sitting still. I mean, I had been meditating since I was 16. And I mean, going to Zen monastery meditation. I wasn't just I was fooling around at home with meditation, but I was also meditating in practice. I was doing those kind of things. So in the early days after Lucy died, I had this deep feeling of connection to all living beings through the experience of suffering. And I felt like for the first time I really understood the noble truth of the first noble truth that life is suffering and that we all go through it. And I could see the grief on people. It was all I could see was the fact that they were grieving. And so I felt connected to every living being. And it was this feeling of, yes, I was deeply grieving the loss of my daughter and feeling so sad. But I also had this kind of effervescent feeling of holiness and connection. Definitely felt very connected to Mary from my Catholic upbringing, right? But I felt connected to all beings. And then it stopped. And I went to see my Buddhist therapist who I'd seen when I was single before I even met Sam. And I remember him saying, so you lost your daughter and you lost your enlightenment. I mean, at that point I hadn't called it enlightenment. I was just like, I had this feeling of like floating and feeling connected to everything and feeling like just complete peace and knowing like everybody suffers and that I am like, my suffering is not more than other people's. And when that was gone, I did grieve that feeling because I felt holy. And then I felt like the worst person in the world because I was jealous of people. I was like feeling all these ugly, ugly emotions. And he suggested Tonglen meditation. And so this meditation really shaped me in the early days after Lucia died. And this practice cracked open something in me that had been tightly, fiercely clenched, and I could get touches of that feeling again. So this Buddhist compassion meditation means sending and taking, or breathing in and out. And I learned Tonglen during that like very devastating period in my life when meditation felt impossible and I was sitting with myself and that felt like sitting in a burning room. And because I was newly grieving and then I became newly sober, so I was like a raw freaking nerve. My nervous system was like an exposed wire and I was just like zing, 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 like after I got sober, I was 2 years after Lucia died. I mean, I was like, I had to re-experience grief all over again. So silence was like unbearable. And in that silence of unbearability, my therapist brings this practice to me. And Tonglen begins with this very, very simple idea, one that Pema Chodron teaches beautifully. And that was the teacher for me for this. So I listened to her audiobook called Good Medicine, and I practiced this with her. And then I began practicing it alone and doing painting sessions for other grieving mothers as I was doing Tonglen meditation. Okay, here's basically where it starts. Other people feel this. Okay, so we have this premise. Other people feel this. So when you're suffering, really suffering, that sentence alone can be a lifeline. It pulls you out of the lonely little cave of my pain, my story, my despair, and reminds you that grief is woven through the world, through humanity, through every life and every story. Other people feel this. It doesn't mean I must compare my grief to other people. It's the feeling of connectedness. So Tonglen invites us to breathe that truth, to breathe in that truth. Other people feel this, which basically means breathing in your suffering as seen through other people. So the heaviness, the grief, the fear, the tightness in your chest, the things you don't want to feel, you are inviting in, right? You're saying, I'm just going to be present with this feeling of suffering. Okay? Other people feel this. Let's breathe that in. Okay, so I'm grieving. I miss my daughter. Other people feel this. And then you breathe out relief, compassion, ease, spaciousness, even the wish for relief. So, may they feel a relief, right? So Tonglen isn't about fixing anyone. It isn't about taking on their trauma. It's not becoming a martyr or like going into that magical thinking. I'm going to take away their suffering now. But it's about softening the suffering, your own and others, by finding compassion. So it stops terrifying you. And in those early months after Lucy's death, my Buddhist therapist explained it this way. If you're feeling something this intensely, you're already in the fire. So maybe you can breathe for all the people experiencing this same fire. You can connect. Not because you want more suffering, not because you're spiritually advanced, but because you're already there. You're already here in the fire. So may this help to feel less alone in the darkness. So when I first tried Tonglen, it overwhelmed me. And I could only really sit for 5 minutes and I'd have to stop because adding the idea that like other people feel this made me so sad. Like in some ways I wanted to be the only one feeling this because I didn't want other people to suffer. You know, I'm one of those people that like just couldn't hurt other people like that. Like I just couldn't, it's hard to for me. It overwhelms me. Like when I watch the news and I'm seeing like war and I'm seeing children walking around without their parents, and just the deep suffering. I cry, like it overwhelms me. But I mean, I can sit with it now, and I do feel like I hear a lot of people in the spiritual community saying I can't watch the news. And sometimes I'm like, we can't ignore the suffering in the world because it doesn't fit our vibe, Like the suffering of the world is an important thing to watch. Because what are we as healers if we're also not working towards justice? And yes, we may be the liberators of the spirit, of energy, but the important part is that we're not ignoring that suffering exists, right? So when I first tried it and I was like really deep in grief, I could only really sit with the full breadth of my suffering and other people's suffering for 5 minutes. Then I'd have to stop, because breathing in that other suffering would felt like drowning. I mean, I'd have to think of other kinds of suffering. Like my father was very sick with MS for most of my adult life, and I was his primary caregiver, So I'd sometimes sit with his suffering, because now I'm suffering. And so I'm just going to hold his suffering too. Or other mothers whose baby died, tragedy, illness, war. I would shut down, but it's because my nervous system simply couldn't hold it. And now I can, right? Because I'm 17 years out of loss. But Tonglen isn't about doing everything perfectly. Tonglen is about turning towards the suffering, not away from it. Even the first thought, this is what Pema Chodron says, even that first thought, other people feel this, is Tonglen. And sometimes that's all you can do. Other people feel this. And some nights that sentence is enough to stop the spiral. And then other nights you can kind of extend it gently and say, may we all be free of this. So first we say, other people feel this. May we all be free of this. And on the rare nights where, the moon is low and something is very soft in me and I felt strong, I could whisper the full practice. Other people feel this. May we all be free of this. And since I'm feeling this already, may I feel it for everyone so they may be free. Not as a burden, as a balm. And over time, Tonglen became very connected to my art, to the Mizuko Jizo paintings I made for grieving parents. To the babies I said prayers for, and the candles I lit in my studio. And I used to sit down and paint and hold the child's name in my mind alongside Lucy's, breathing in for both of us, for both the mother and the child, breathing for their parents, breathing in for everyone who has had to survive the unthinkable. And I would say, since I'm already feeling this grief, may I feel it for them, so they may be free. And it was the mantra that I said as I painted. And so I would call them Tonglen painting sessions. And I didn't know it then, but that was the stepping stones for the healing work that I do now. Tonglen made me so much braver around suffering. It dissolved my fear of darkness. It taught me that grief is never solitary. It's tribal. And it reminded me that compassion isn't something you think. It's something you generate through presence. Tonglen also gave me a strange kind of self-compassion. Not pitying, and not really self-soothing, but a compassion that says, oh, honey, you're human. You're allowed to feel this because other people feel this too. And that alone shifted something fundamental on me. As someone in recovery, part of our work in recovery is going through the steps. And a lot of people think these steps are mystical or something. They're not. They're like Ignatian steps. They've been around for much longer than AA. They're different now. They're focused on alcoholism, but we do something it's the fourth step, which is we take an inventory of basically every harm we've caused to other people and harms done to us. and we look at what we can. It's basically like doing, I would say, like the serenity prayer. You figure out what you can control and what you can't control. What was my role in this? What wasn't? So if I'm an alcoholic, I don't show up for work and I get fired. I may have a resentment for getting fired. But then when I look at it, I'm like, oh yeah, I showed up drunk to work, every day for a week, or I didn't show up at all, didn't call. I got fired because that's that person's job, to not have a chaotic drunk person. So we can help like loosen the resentment because we see the role that we put and the place we put that person in, right? That shifts. So the fourth step is us writing that. The fifth step is us telling another human. And it's scary. It says, we tell ourselves the truth. We tell another human the truth. And we tell God the truth. So we say it out loud, all these things to someone else. And it's a very sacred process in AA. We do this, I think mine was 6 hours alone with my sponsor, just telling her all the things that happened in my life. And the compassion, we just sit in we just sit and hold space. So it was powerful when somebody did that for me. And I was very humbled and embarrassed, and I had to keep working with the shame and the embarrassment and the humiliation and all that stuff to kind of change it to humility. And my sponsor never said anything like, you should be ashamed of yourself, Angie. At the end, she said, you're a good person, Angie. What really changed my life was hearing another woman's fifth step. Because once I heard the things that she was thinking, the things that she wrote down as harm she caused other people, that were things that had been done to her, I started to have so much compassion for my own journey. And that is such a beautiful part of the work we do, because compassion is that center that we need. Tonglen gives it to us. Tonglen is like saying, yeah, there's these emotions that we hate about ourselves, and we have to feel them and we have to live in them, but other people feel them too. It's a very human experience to feel this. And so, since you're already feeling it, why not alleviate? Why not say, okay, I'll help, I'll feel this, and I'll accept it, and I'll love it, and I'll breathe out relief for other people. And that alone shifts something in you, something fundamental. So if you're in the weeds right now, if you're grieving, anxious, overwhelmed, overstimulated, or just spiritually threadbare, you don't need to sit on a cushion and breathe in the world's pain. You don't have to do a full Tonglen practice. Just start with the seed. Other people feel this. Let it connect you to humanity and not isolate you from it. Let it tenderize something in your chest. Let it be enough. And if later, someday, you want to breathe in the suffering and breathe out relief for yourself, those you love, for strangers, that door will open when you're ready. But Tonglen taught me that grief isn't a punishment, it's a portal. And compassion, even the smallest drop of it, is what carries us through. Thank you for sitting with me today and for letting these essays, these pieces of my heart, be part of your day. As I look back at these essays and reread them nearly a decade later, I'm struck by how grief keeps teaching me and reshaping me and humbling me. Gratitude does too. They're not opposites, they're companions, and they take turns at the wheel. And grief reminds me what I've loved. Gratitude reminds me I'm still here to love. Wherever you are in your own healing, whether you're screaming through the birth canal of transformation or learning to breathe again inside your grief, or simply remembering that other people feel this too, I hope you know this. The scream, the holy scream, clears the way, not just for you, but for everyone. There's no wrong place to be. Your feelings are not mistakes. Your suffering is not a spiritual failure. Your healing does not have to look holy to be holy. You are so worthy of compassion. And most importantly, you're not alone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing this breath with me. And I'll talk at you next time. Thanks for listening to Centered with me, Angie Yingst. If you'd like to send me a question or comment about this show or any shows, you can send them to Angie@themoonandstone.com.